So in today's video, I want to talk about my experiences having worn the RingConn Smart Ring for the last 60 days. And I want to go through some of the things that I've learned from having this on my finger that I would never have known if I didn't go through this experience. You may have seen about 2 months ago, I posted a video with 14 tips to optimize your sleep. And within that, tip number 5 was tracking your sleep so that you actually know what's going on. And for me, as someone who doesn't like to wear watches or any other wearable tech to bed, I've never been able to track my sleep in any meaningful way to get an understanding of how good or bad it might actually be. So when RingConn reached out to me 2 months ago to test out their ring, as I mentioned in the previous video, it's actually been really convenient to have the technology and the ability to measure my sleep by just wearing a ring on my finger. So as promised during that video, I wanted to wear this ring for 2 months to just obtain as much data as I could about my sleep and my sleep habits. But not only that, the great thing about this ring is that it also gives me a sense of my stress levels throughout any given time throughout the day. And as a physiotherapist, the ability to measure and track my sleep and my stress is inherently hugely valuable to better understand how my body is functioning, but also how that may affect any aches, pains, or dysfunctions that I or anyone else may experience. Because from a sleep perspective, we know that your ability to sleep can heavily influence your pain experience in terms of how intense it feels, how prolonged that pain experience tends to be. It can affect your healing rate, your day-to-day mood, and a whole range of other things can be affected by the quality and the duration of your nightly sleep. And from a stress perspective, much like sleep, stress plays a huge role in determining how painful something feels for you and how prolonged that pain is. And for people that deal with chronic pain, mental health dysfunction, chronic illness, the more we're looking into these things, the more we're starting to understand is that the persistence and the duration of these issues can piggyback off of a nervous system that might be chronically heightened compared to one that should be more relaxed and downregulated. And much like sleep, if we don't have the ability to track how our sleep and our stress is going, then we could be missing a huge piece of the puzzle that's going on behind the scenes that we may never actually be able to bring to the front of our minds, giving us the opportunity to do something about it. So what I wanted to run through in this video is I wanted to show you some of the data that I've collected over the last 2 months and discuss what that means for me and what I've learned about myself that I would never have noticed if I didn't go through this experience with the Smart Ring. Now, the first thing that I noticed when going back through the time that I'd worn this ring is there were some days that I'd missed. And the reason for this was that although the battery on the ring can last for up to a week, there were times where I forgot that I had the ring on and hence forgot to charge it. So for any of the days where you see that I didn't capture any data, I obviously didn't include them in the statistics that I'll go through, but that was essentially on me for not being aware enough to just put the thing on charge consistently. So delving into the data over the last 60 days, what I found was that my average sleep score was 85 out of 100 and my average stress score was 48. From this graph here, you'll see that the majority of my sleep scores sat above 85 out of 100. There were clearly some subpar ones in the 50s and 60s, but from a general perspective, the majority of my night's sleep were reasonable. And what's important to understand about the sleep score itself is that it takes into account a number of things like your heart rate, skin temperature, and other things like that to get an understanding of the quality of your sleep, not just its duration. And based on the algorithm and the metrics that RingConn uses, I'm pretty comfortable that my sleep is okay. Clearly, in this modern world, it's impossible to sleep perfectly all the time. I have a relatively young son. We do a little bit of traveling to see family and friends. And within the day-to-day life, it can be really hard to maintain the consistency that might be required to consistently have an ideal sleep score. But what something like the RingConn Smart Ring has allowed me to understand about my sleep is that although the majority of my days are relatively good, there are still some days which are nowhere near good enough to support healthy function day to day. And having said that, if my sleep score happened to be down in the 60s, 70s, and low 80s more consistently, it may then give me an opportunity to take stock of what I'm actually doing in the lead up to my bedtime. Am I going to bed too late? Am I not going to bed early enough to support the lifestyle that I feel I want to have? And in terms of other boring statistics, my average sleep score being 85 can sometimes be a little bit misleading when you take in the extremes, the good and the bad. So when I take the median score, which as you may know, lines up essentially all the numbers and then picks out the number that's in the middle, my median sleep score jumps up to 89. So again, what that tells me is that there were some terrible days at the low end that dragged my average down, but because there was consistently more scores in the 85s, the 90s, and the 95s, it again gives me more confidence that the quality of my sleep, more often than not, is relatively acceptable. I'd love to bump that up into the high 90s if possible, but that would require me to be more consistent again with my bedtime, making sure that I'm exercising more throughout the day, maybe doing some soft tissue work before going to bed, or even better, trying to optimize those 14 tips that I went through in the preceding video to this one. And now, having gathered enough data over the last 2 months in regards to my sleep, I'm pretty keen to go back through those 14 tips and just try and find the ones that I can optimize more and more, and then come back to this again after 6 months to see if I've actually been able to shift those numbers in a more positive direction for me. But the theme that I think is really important to take away from this is that if you aren't measuring your sleep, it can be nigh on impossible to get an objective understanding about the raw data of how your sleep may actually be. By all means, we need to pair that raw data up with how you feel, because if I'm getting to 95 on average, but I wake up feeling tired and dreary, that may still be suggestive of something else that isn't optimized somewhere else in my life. But the moral here for me is that if I'm not measuring my sleep in a way that's convenient for me, that I can't do anything about it if it's not where I want it to be. And thankfully, we can take that exact same approach with my stress scores. And for me, looking back, this was actually the most surprising of the two. Before looking at the numbers, I identify as someone who maybe doesn't feel a lot of stress. I'd like to think that I present as relatively calm and relaxed. And to be upfront and honest, I am someone who suffers from social anxiety. It's not crippling in any way. And it may sound funny that as a physiotherapist, I deal with people every day. But in larger groups of people, I do go into my shell a little bit more because I do feel anxious in those moments. So what was really surprising to me is that when I went back through the data over the last 2 months, my average stress score was 48. And from the parameters that RingConn set for this metric, they categorize your level of stress into 4 categories. As you can see, a stress score between 1 and 30, they consider you as being relaxed. 30 to 59 is like a normal baseline where they would expect that your nervous system isn't heightened or it isn't necessarily downregulated. And thankfully for me, 48 is relatively smack bang in the middle. It was surprising for me to know that because I know that my stress and my social anxiety has been a little bit higher than I would have expected over the last 2 months. To see that my average score was 48 and the median score when I line all those numbers up together was also 48. It's really reassuring to know, at least by the metrics and the standards that RingConn set, that my day-to-day life is relatively normal. If I just pull up one random day, you'll see that there is definitely an ebb and a flow of being relaxed, being in the normal zone, being in the moderate zone, and also some spikes of being in the high zone. And it's good to reassure myself and you as well that those fluctuations are normal. Being a human, especially a modern human, there are definitely going to be moments throughout the day where your nervous system needs to upregulate to deal with something. It could be a genuine threat, or it could just be a thing in your life that requires you to be higher functioning, whether that's work, life stress, family stress, maybe you come across someone that's extremely unpleasant. Those spikes in our physiology are intensely normal, and in a way, they're not the problem. What you'll hopefully see in this one is that although I did have a spike, it took a little bit of time for that to come back down again. And it's the coming back down again, which is the thing that we need to work on a lot more. And I also want to keep an eye on for myself going forwards, because it's not the spike that's abnormal. It's the fact that it didn't downregulate again relatively quickly. And for me as a physiotherapist, as I've spoken about a number of times, when we're dealing with chronic pain and potentially chronic illness, mental health dysfunction, a lot of the time, those issues are based upon a nervous system that's chronically heightened. And it's that baseline that's shifted up to a large degree and staying there, which can heavily impact pain, your pain experience, the pain duration and intensity, even beyond the presence of tissue damage. So for me and anyone else who tracks their stress, it's really important to understand not what it gets to, but how quickly it comes back down again. If you do find that there are periods throughout your day where it does spike and then it stays relatively high, thankfully I didn't have too many of those, then that is something that you must absolutely try and address just to help your body function better and more optimally. As you can see with my distribution of stress scores, I had a couple of great days at the low end of normal. I didn't have any days where it was completely relaxed, and I think it's probably hard for that to be the case unless you're physically actively trying to make that happen through lots of breathing, meditation and things like that. But it's nice to see that the overwhelming majority of my days fit within the normal range. And what's really pleasing for me to see looking back at the numbers is that throughout the last 60 days, I didn't have a single day that would be categorized as being above normal. I didn't didn't have a day that was moderate, and thankfully I didn't have a day that was high, despite periods within my days being elevated. And that's really pleasing for me to know, because as someone who genuinely tries to make sure that I can mitigate my stress response, because of what I've come to understand about myself, whether it's cold showers, ice baths, I do a lot of deep breathing consistently, I try and exercise, I care about my sleep. It's nice to know that it looks like those things are helping me buffer the other things that I deal with. And again, if I didn't measure that, if I wasn't able to track that consistently with the RingConn Smart Ring, then I'd have no way of knowing that. I'd have no objective measures that I can draw from to continue to optimize my stress and hopefully help me enjoy my life and help my body function better. So at the end of the day, wearing this ring for 2 months has been a really positive experience, but it's such a convenient way to monitor things that I would just never normally get a chance to monitor. So as I said before, I'm going to keep going with this for another 6 months. I want to try and implement some more stress relieving strategies. I'm going to keep working on my fitness. I'm going to keep trying to work on my sleep optimization as well. And then again, I'll post another video down the track just detailing what I've learned again from this experience. So with that being said, thanks again to RingConn for sending me this smart ring. If you are interested in potentially purchasing one for yourself, I'll leave a link in the description below. I hope that it at the very least helps you pause for a second just to consider how your sleep and your stress might be throughout the day, whether you might need to start to do things to optimize that a little bit more for your physical and your mental health. But as always, thank you again for watching, and I hope to see you next time.